Welcome to the Young CPA Success Show. If you're a young accounting professional, this podcast is your ultimate guide to navigating your early career. Join us as we share valuable insights, expert advice, and practical tips to help you kickstart your path to success and excel in the accounting industry. Let's embark on this exciting accounting journey together.
So I think, I guess where I'd like to start is there's a lot of different ways, I think, to talk about financial planning. There's a couple of different avenues. One thing that I picked up from your website is, and I think this is a huge thing, you are a fiduciary. And that's a word that I think carries a lot of weight and people don't really understand what it really means. Can you explain why that's important and, what that means for clients and people that are working with you?
So you're going to start with my hot button and just get me all fired up just to start the whole thing.
I mean, we're going from
That's how we do
100.
things here.
Yeah, we don't mess
That's
around.
right.
We're going to talk about fiduciary. I think it's important.
It's crucially important.
Mm-hmm.
You hit my launch control button and the floors to the pedals to the floor now.
I love it.
Yeah, this is something that I'm extremely passionate about because, first of all, I'll just start by saying that before we even talk about what a fiduciary is in our field, I'll start by saying that the way the law is written in Washington right now is that any financial advisor can say they're a fiduciary as long as they disclose when they're not working in a fiduciary capacity, which to me blows the whole thing up. I mean, it's like if everybody, I don't know, I can't think of a really good analogy right now. I'm usually pretty good at that, but it's like if everybody can say they're a fiduciary all the time, except they're just, they're supposed to put their hand on a Bible and promise they're going to disclose when they're not acting in a fiduciary capacity, when they're essentially selling somebody an investment that's going to charge a huge commission to put a new deck on the back of their house. I don't think that person is a fiduciary by definition, but that's the way the law is written. So I think I had to say that to get that out of the way right up front, because you can't just sit down over coffee with somebody in the financial advisory world or financial planning world and in your area, your city, and say, hey, are you a fiduciary? And have them say yes, and have that be the end of the conversation. There has to be more questions asked. And the big question really is, two questions, and they're the same question, but asked in a different way. The first is, are you a fee-only financial advisor? And the other way of asking would be, do you have the ability to legally charge commissions? And if you are a fee-only firm, the answer should be yes. If you ask that question, yes, I am. Okay, you're done. There's nothing else to ask. I mean, you're sitting down with a good person who has no conflicts of interest. Not to say there aren't lots of great people, by the way, who are hybrid, RIA, brokerage firm hybrids, insurance agency, even captive advisors. There's tons of great people out there. But the issue in our industry, is really the commissions at the end of the day. It doesn't matter if I'm a brand new financial advisor coming out of the gate that needs to put food on the table, which I was at one point, by the way, broke, going door to door, business to business, literally in the snow. It wasn't uphill both ways, like our parents and grandparents said, but, I found a way to make it downhill sometimes. But it was, it was rough, but you have to put food on the table. But if you're an experienced advisor, 15, 20 years, doesn't make a difference. And let's just say your spouse is like, hey, I really want to get this kitchen renovation done. And you have a choice between this $1 million client you've just brought on board who trusts you, between putting a portion or all, for that matter, of their money into something that's going to pay you maybe an annualized fee that's smaller, or a big, huge upfront commission that's going to pay for that kitchen or that bathroom. It doesn't matter. The problem is it gets in your head and it creates that conflict, and you have to do the right thing. And I'm confident there's lots of advisors out there that do the right thing. But I think it's best to avoid that conflict altogether. So are you a fee-only firm? Yes, is the answer you want. And then do you have legally, do you have the ability to charge commissions? No, should be the answer to that question. I have no brokerage licenses, no insurance licenses. I did, or they were waived for whatever reason, like CFP. When you get the CFP, it's waived, like Series 65, for instance. But a fiduciary in a nutshell is somebody who, in the financial advisory world, is going to do what's best for you, the client, even if it means less revenue for the firm. And the way it's upheld is you have to, if you're in this business and you've had brokerage licenses, like I had a Series 7, Series 24, 31, 63, life, health, variable annuity, and insurance licenses, I had to drop them all. And it was a terrifying day, my birthday of, 2013, I think it was, when I said, okay, I'm cutting. I got to take all these tests over again if I want them. But, I think it was the right thing to do.
Well,
So that's what a fiduciary is. Long-winded answer. Sorry.
no, that's a great answer, and you hit on a lot of things that are really important to me. Hannah, I don't know if you know this, but I know most of our audience doesn't know this. At one point, I did have my Series 65, and was kind of going down that RIA route, and it was, again, a lot of great people at this firm doing a lot of great work, but there were some things that when you start to notice, like, oh, well, the firm owns the bank that's housing all of the investments, and all of these percentages are getting rolled up, and I started to get very uncomfortable with sitting there saying, like, I going to be pushing people to this model because it's what I actually think is best for them, or am I going to be pushing this to this model because it's what's best for the firm? And if it's best for the firm, that's what's best for me, and that's how I'm going to learn and grow. That was my big fear. It might have been a little bit unfounded. I don't want anybody who, I'm not going to say what firm it was or any of those types of things. Like, it's a great firm, great people, they do great work. It was a relationship that I was a little bit uncomfortable with. And I was worried for myself about, would I have that integrity at the end of the day to tell that client, hey, maybe you shouldn't go with us. Maybe you should go somewhere else. And that
I
was
feel like there's so much opportunity for the lines to get blurred
100%.
in that. Like, as much as somebody I think wants to go, like, Joey, I know, like, your heart, like, I know that you would have gone into that, like, with very good intention. But then, like you said, Adam, like, your wife comes to you and is like, hey, like, I want to put in a pool in my backyard. And then you've got a choice to make. Like, even subconsciously, I feel like there's just opportunities for lines to be blurred.
Sure.
And I love, Adam, that you gave us some questions, because I don't even know that I would have known the right questions to even ask in that environment. But if somebody were to answer the first question as, no, I'm not a fee-only fiduciary, is there still a way to leverage that relationship in a productive way to where, like, you feel safe and respected in that environment? Or is it like, no, ma'am, you run the other direction?
Such a good question, and I've never been asked that before. And I think that goes back to the, you have to dig deeper. I think that we've all in our lives done a pretty good job of judging character.
Mm-hmm.
And then every once in a while, like in my life, I've been alive for almost 46 years now. And I think there's been 3 or 4 times where I've really been screwed, where I really trusted somebody. Once I trust somebody, I tend to put all my trust in them. And, like, unless you do something to really screw that up, like, I trust you. And I there's been a few times where I've been really taken to the cleaners, and it, whether that be personally, professionally, a couple times professionally. And so I think that you have to go into it understanding that the probability of vetting that person out, asking all the right questions, and feeling good about them personally, because I think that's really more what it's about. It's like their morals, their ethics, like, what are they passionate? Like, that's what I was joking, like, oh, you're gonna hit my hot button, Joey, right when we start here, because, like, the reason I do what I do is to save people. That's what I do. I protect and I save people. That's the only reason we bring on new clients these days. So, I think that if you're working with somebody who, or sitting down with somebody who is not a fee-only firm or fee-only fiduciary, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I think you can still work with them and engage with them. I just think you want to spend some more time with them. Not that you wouldn't with the fee-only person anyway. Of course you'd want to, but you want to spend some more time asking them questions about, tell me about a story where you were faced with a conflict of interest, where you had a choice between a commission and doing something else. Tell me about a situation. Give me a stereotypical portfolio that you would build for a client, and what does that look like? And we could do a whole second podcast on building portfolios, and ones that maybe look a little fishy, and ones that are, ethically sound. Because I think that there's something to be said for diversification, but then I've seen portfolios where, there's some mutual funds, there's some ETFs, there's some stocks. I have no problem with any of that. Then you start seeing UITs, and then you start seeing, and it's like there's usually a commission tied to that UIT. And I start thinking of the things that I was taught when I was young about, diversify portfolies, get more products in the mix to make the relationship stickier. So is the portfolio good, or is it a sticky portfolio? Are we trying to create more perceived trust and even perceived experience? So I think you would ask any professional about their ethics, their morals, what they ask about stories. Tell me a situation when you saved a client. Tell me a story about when you've built a portfolio that you disagreed with when a portfolio come in from another firm. Why And I was, they were all way smarter than me, and that okay. Which part? The whole thing?
It
I didn't
started
hear
when you
you.
were talking a little bit about kind of that portfolio building, and is it a good portfolio or is it a
Okay, I'll
sticky
start there.
portfolio? And then it
All right.
started getting just a little bit robotic.
Okay. So I think like when you're looking at portfolios that come in your office as a CPA, you're going to see them. You're doing your taxes. You're looking for taxable, taxable gains, short term, long term. You're looking for, how to build that tax return out. I think that you can look at the portfolio and start to ask yourselves questions when you're talking to a financial advisor you're working with, and think, okay, do they own some mutual funds, some ETFs, some stocks? That's usually not that big a deal. There's no red flags there. You start to see red flags. There's nothing wrong with annuities. They're good investments for some people for some of your money.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is when they look like they're great investments for all people for all your money. When you start seeing big, huge annuities in portfolios, when you start seeing like annuities and Roth IRAs, I question whether that makes sense at all. College savings with life insurance, I'm not so sure that makes any sense. If you see UITs are something I don't see a whole lot of anymore, but typically you'll see it in conjunction with a bunch of different types of investments. And I think that the goal here could have been to create the illusion of expertise or the illusion of diversification, when in reality it was just, let's put a bunch of different stuff together to make a really sexy portfolio that's maybe really hard to understand. You know what I mean? So, and then, I feel like I was saying earlier, CPAs, from our side of the fence, when I was starting my career, I was so terrified of CPAs. I was afraid that they knew everything and I knew nothing. And it took me a while to realize that like CPAs, they know their tax stuff and their audit stuff like the back of their hand. And I know very little about that. That's not my wheelhouse. It's not my lane. I stay out of that lane. But when it comes to what we do, I think that financial advisors need to do a better job of educating and kind of having a 2-lane road educational conversation about the investments and portfolio management and financial planning strategies. Because I think that as financial advisors, one thing CPAs need to be aware of is that we think you guys know it all.
Mm.
We do. And then so we won't educate you. We'll make big assumptions thinking you already know it. Because maybe, for instance, you might say the phrase cash balance plan. And then a young advisor might know what a cash balance plan is. So if you know what a cash balance plan is, you must know everything else underneath it then, which isn't true, right? You just happen to know what a cash balance plan is because
It's
it's a
all smoke
huge
and mirrors.
tax
Like
savings.
it's all smoke and mirrors. Fun fact, I literally just learned about a cash balance plan on Friday in a conversation that I have. So yeah, I can say yes to that, and I'll trick you into thinking I know all the things now.
Sure, but that's exactly right. I mean, as soon as you say something, whether it's just in conversation, there's a pretty advanced technique. The advisor is going to think you know everything underneath that. Like it's like math 101, 104, 252. Like all the math all the way up to derivatives and calculus. You know it all, and we're just like the stupid peon that doesn't know anything, and now we're just terrified of you. So I think that there needs to be more dialogue back and forth with CPAs and advisors, and they can really teach each other a lot.
Well, and I love that you kind of explained it as a Venn diagram where there's a lot of overlap, but again, I'll use cash balance plans because that is one, Hannah, we've talked about in the past before too, about what's the appropriate vehicle for this person. You could take two companies that have identical P&Ls, right? Everything about the business is structurally the same. One has an owner who's 60 years old, one has an owner who's 35 years old. You might change the calculus on a cash balance plan because actuarially it
Huge.
doesn't make sense. And that's where you need, as a CPA, to start developing those good relationships with CFPs and other folks who can start to help you pick the right vehicle for the journey that you want to go. I've had some situations where we've set up a cash balance combo plan and really driven some big, really good financial planning, using the tax planning, using things to transition a business from owner one to owner two. But structurally speaking, that worked because we did 15 other things behind the scenes before you get to the cash balance plan. So again, it's
Right.
we go into it thinking it's a one size fits all solution. Oh, this is the magic thing that works. And you're like, kind of. It works for certain things, but maybe something else works differently. And that's where that dialogue really has to come into play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in the simple stuff too. I mean, that's like really, really simple. I wish earlier in my career I would have talked more to CPAs about portfolio management and building portfolios and how that really how it. I mean, because they know the basics, but how does it look when it looks right, and how does it look when you start to see red flags? What are those red flags?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I've got one for me that I always gets my antenna going a little bit. When I see with a fee only firm a lot of mutual funds in there, I always want to know, like, hey, tell me about what other fees are coming from this mutual fund.
Mm-hmm.
What's the fee load on those? Like, again, one thing, if we're talking about proper diversification and the fee only planners helping me with investment allocation, or we're really doing more of a long-term kind of play on figuring out, I love those things from, I can't remember what, was it TD Ameritrade that had like the what's your number, where like people would walk around carrying their retirement
I
number.
think that was either Fidelity. It might have been even John Hancock.
Might
I
have been
forget, but I
John
know what you're
Hancock.
talking about.
I love that analogy because it is so easy for people to understand, like, oh, I just know what my number is, right? But how do you even calculate the number, right? Like there's a 15 things that need to go into it before that. But figuring out and having that conversation and helping someone understand, like, okay, this is why we've got a certain part of your thing over here, because this is helping with this specific part of the plan. And yeah, you're going to pay 1% to that mutual fund, but this is why I think it's worth it. Like those are some of those conversations that CPAs can help.
Yeah.
Really dive
And like
into.
philosophically speaking, like we don't use mutual funds at our office at all. We haven't since 2008. And then we use all individual stocks and ETFs because I don't see any reason why you should use a mutual fund if you can use an ETF. Personally, that's my personal opinion.
I tend to lean with you on that, by the way, just FYI.
Yeah.
I think that's a great way to do
some
it.
people don't, so I don't to be fair, obviously, but yeah.
Well, so the accounting industry in general is moving very much towards advisory services. I think that the way that our industry used to function was very much like churn out the tax return, churn out the audit, whatever that might be. We were just, a cog in a machine a lot of times. And sure, there were certainly opportunities to advise clients within a tax relationship, but there are specific like client advisory services that we now offer within our industry. So speaking to our younger professionals who are just starting out in their career and they're like, okay, I see where this is going, even within the tax and audit space. And I know that I need clearly after this conversation to develop a relationship with a CFP, or at least learn something from someone. Like, how would you recommend even like initiating that conversation? Because like kind of like you said, like I think that there's some misconceptions of bias around like some intimidation, and really we want to bridge the gap here, I guess, is what I'm looking for. Is like, how would you recommend that somebody who recognizes the need go in and try to bridge that gap, to have the conversation, to learn more, and to develop the relationship?
Well, part of the problem you're going to run into as CPAs is that you're going to be prospected a lot by financial advisors. So it's going to be, I think you want to be two things. I think for one, you want to be careful what calls you take, because you're going to have no shortage of phone calls and emails. So it'd be easy. And then I guess that's number two. Number two is don't be complacent and just wait for people to come to you. I'd rather, if I were you, if I were in your shoes, I'd rather you just go out and find the right person or people, and it's probably always good to have maybe two. I always have what I call my starters and my bench. You know what I mean? Like the person that I strut. Like I'm more monogamous. I don't believe in that whole when you start in the financial advisory world, they teach you to cast a wide net. That's what they call it. Like get a bunch of CPAs and then treat them all really well and hope you get a referral. That's not good business, in my opinion. I think you want to find somebody that you like, you respect them, you trust them. They're good at what they do, and you like hanging out. And you build a great relationship. You share ideas, and if referrals come, great. I mean, but if really it's more about if I send a client to them, that client's going to have their socks blown off so that they're going to send me referrals, having nothing to do with the CPA. But that all aside, the first place that I would go if I were a younger CPA or any CPA is to the Exit Planning Institute, EPI. I would, at the risk of sounding maybe a little bit biased here, I'm a CPA, a certified exit planning advisor. So the EPI is the industry, or not the industry, the organization that sponsors the CPA designation. and it's growing really, really fast. And so these are not only financial advisors, but I think if you find somebody who's a certified financial planner, so who has that kind of elite designation from a strategy and planning standpoint, and then on top of that, they've got the CPA designation, which is a business advisory designation, they're not going to have, I don't think, they're not going to do what you do. Like, we aren't going to do what you do. You're going to do what you do. We're going to do what we do. Then there's going to be business brokers that do what they do, corporate attorneys that do what they do, business bankers that do what they do, and then implementers, transition plan and business transition consulting implementers that do what they do. Like, we don't do that. So it's like, I think there's lots of synergies to be had there. So if you went to the EPI, and I know they're not the only organization out there. I know there's another one. I think it's headquartered in California, actually. But if you just do a search on their website, I think you can do a search and just literally search by designation, search for CPAs that are CPAs. Reach out to them, send them an email, grab coffee, lunch, whatever, drink after work, and you just get. And then the next step I would do is, not that you want to hear this, but I would go through a questionnaire. Like, I have one. I'd be happy to share it with you guys. You can share it with your CPAs, but I have a big, huge questionnaire I take all my professionals with to, first and foremost, get to know them personally, professionally. And there are lots of great questions. And then from there, then I share what I do. Like, here's how I work with my clients step by step. And that way we all understand how we work with people. So there's trust, but not just trust from the standpoint of, do we like each other? And do you do what you do? And do I think you do it well? But how do you do it? So that'd be the first thing I would do, I guess. And I think you'd probably be good to go there. I don't know that you need to go any further.
Well, I think that's a great, I like the exit planning thing is one of the things that always cracks me up is someone's like, hey, I'm ready to sell my business. And my response is, great. That's at least a 2 to 5 year process, depending on where you are.
Yep.
And my personal preference, how I like to practice, and that is, I want to get as many of the relevant stakeholders in the room as early as possible so we can plan. I think, I can't remember if this fact is still true. At one point it was true. You were always, at least in the certain industries that I worked in, going to have a higher sales price if you were able to sell to somebody internally versus externally. So we would go down that route with our clients. It's okay, look, is there anybody within the business that could do this? Normally for us, we worked with a lot of medical professionals. That person existed. But if it's not, then okay, now you start going down again that checklist of like, okay, here's how we're going to do this. We're going to list it here. We're going to do this. We're going to try to get this price. Or, maybe the financial planner says, hey, you need to sell your business for, I'll just make up a number here, $5 million, so that your financial plan works. CFO's looking at it saying, well, in order for us to do that, we need to grow over the next 2 years to hit this EBITDA. Like, those are the types of things where a CPA could be really great at quarterbacking all those different moving pieces, and getting the right person in the right spot to execute the plan. So I think it's creating those relationships up front is so huge.
I also think we need to get, especially young CPAs, doing it all over again. We need to get the phrase exit planning out of our vocabulary.
Yeah,
just get rid of it, because I like to call it business transition planning.
Mm-hmm.
We're transitioning you from wherever you are today to wherever you want to be, wherever that is.
Yeah.
De-risking, reducing customer concentration, creating continuity, obviously increasing profits, but getting the business owner out of the business, making it run like a real business, so that it's going to grow faster, it's going to grow more efficiently. And if somebody walks in, a competitor one day, never mind continuity, and says, hey, I want to buy you, it's like, I always joke, it's like CrossFit. Be ready for anything, anytime. It's like, if somebody walks in, a competitor, and says, I want to buy you, and then they walk in, they're like, wait a minute, you've got continuity plan in place. You've got golden handcuffs on your employees, your managers. The business doesn't need you. Your customer concentration is diverse. I mean, buy sells are in place. That company just became exponentially higher in value, enterprise value, just because of the intangibles. Never mind profits. Never mind bottom line. Never mind EBITDA. So I think that we need to, young CPAs, young advisors, and young business owners need to stop thinking, oh, I'll sell when I sell. I'll get around to it. Because they talk about the terrible T's, or the terrible T's, sorry, that's real estate. The terrible the D's, the divorce, disability, disease, disagreements with partners.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are all the things that, like, when you're 72 years old, it's all of a sudden you're selling at a fire sale or dissolving. There's another D, because you didn't do any planning.
Well, and I love that, because I've told as part of our CFO practice that, hey, we need to review all of our operating agreements to make sure those 4 Ds are addressed, because that's, again, something that we need to just have in place. That's kind of permission to play, in my opinion, on that. having, I think there's a lot of misconceptions too from business owners about like what the actual thing is. And I have this conversation with my clients all the time. Sure, you can grow some revenues, but I think you're better off maybe having if your ideal revenue is 100, right? I'd rather you have 80% of the revenues at good profit margins than 100% of that profit, but your profit margins are terrible. You don't have the infrastructure in place. One of those is a good business. The other one, you're just driving a valuation, but you're never going to get it if the intangibles of the business aren't there. It requires all the pieces.
And most owners don't know any of that.
No, they don't.
And that's the part that's the other thing that fires me up is, the statistics that 80% of businesses don't sell, they dissolve, and that 75% of the 20% sell for less than market value. I mean, that's a reason to go out there and save the world. First of all, bring awareness so that owners understand this problem, and then get them engaged in fixing the problem, not treating it like exit planning, but let's get your business running like a freaking well-oiled machine now, so that not only will you make more money, not only is the business safer, not only is it more efficient, but by the way, you're gonna have more fun. You're gonna have a life, or at least more of a life. Owners are kind of addicts when it comes to work, I think. So
I was going to say that they don't always turn that off, but that is very similar to some of the coaching I've given to my clients. Is like, look, let's create a legacy business for you. If you sell it, great. If not, you've at least got an annuitized stream of income that you can kind of keep around for a while with not no effort, but certainly a lot less effort than what you were doing before. Never going to be perfect, but we can try to.
Joey, I like that you mentioned like getting all the right people like in the room as early as you can get them in the room. I think that is where I'm seeing with my clients some of the most productive conversations happen, is people that you would not normally think to put in a room together, being in a room together and just saying all the things in one space versus these one-off conversations happening without everybody there to hear the context around it. So we've talked about I almost said exit planning, business transition planning piece of things with this. What are other conversations, Adam, that you see from our lens that you'd like to be a part of throughout the advisory, like client business life cycle, that we could be more aware to bring you in sooner?
I think one of the things that we talked about a little bit offline that I think is huge right now, and it's not going to be around forever, I don't think, is the use of, it's a strategy. It's the use of DSTs, Delaware Statutory Trusts, and 1031 exchanges. Here's the situation, just to make it a story instead of like a technical discussion. Grandpa owns a bunch of real estate, commercial, residential, doesn't make a difference. Doesn't matter what kind of real estate it is either. One of two things happens. A, he doesn't want to own it anymore. He doesn't feel retired. Doesn't matter that property management companies are taking care of it. Just feels like he's too busy. He's not just busy all the time. That's option one. And just wants out. Option two is he doesn't mind it, but the kids don't want to deal with it. Like, when you're gone, the last thing I want to do is manage all this real estate, But he doesn't want to pay the capital gains tax because he's owned these things forever. Rent's gone up. These are great investments. They're increasing value. Heaven forbid interest rates come down and they go up even more. So then there's more capital gains tax, right? So what you can do, everybody knows, I say everybody who buys real estate, investors in real estate, know you can do a 1031 to a let-kind property, sell a commercial property, buy another property, defer the taxes, right? Most people don't know there's these things called Delaware Statutory Trusts, which are like, instead of owning active real estate, as I call it, which is literally owning the real estate yourself and managing it yourself, there are private placement real estate companies out there where you can say, sell a commercial building for $1 million. It's got a profit of $800,000. You take the entire proceeds, you 1031 it into a DST, and now you're going to be a fractional owner of a hospital in Dallas. Now you defer all the taxes. Now you're going to get, say, 3 to 4% passive income. You don't have to do any property management anymore. Now, if you are lucky enough to live long enough to where that thing needs to be liquidated, now you can just do it again. Now you can 1031 it to a new DST, and you get to choose the property, by the way, the type, where it's at. It's your choice, and there's lots of them out there. And then you keep getting that passive income. When you pass, now it steps up in basis, just like the physical real estate would. So you avoid all the taxes, but you also avoid all the work, and the kids are happy. So that's a pretty cool strategy.
Well, I think that's another thing too on that speaking of like using the professionals, that's one too, where I used to work in real estate, so we did a lot of 1031s, and like having a good 1031 facilitator to help you kind of put those pieces together is massive on that. And you hit on something there that I thought was really interesting, and I think we're going to agree on this. We haven't pre-showed on this, so I'm curious if this is going to go the way I think it's going to go.
Oh boy.
You mentioned your kind of hot button topic. My hot button topic from a perspective is like thinking about taxes and thinking about how investments relate to taxes.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I've constantly tried to talk about myself, but also to my clients, is like, okay, look, you can manage your taxes, but I have this thing against, liquidating stocks that might be good in investments to harvest losses just so you don't have to pay taxes and gains and stuff like that. I think it's really important for you to look at the entire picture and say, what's maximizing my after-tax wealth building, not what's minimizing my tax in this 1 year. Those types of things with DSTs are akin to that thing. What makes the most sense for the long term, not just for me, but for the future generations, for my family. I've seen some stuff with real estate where you can do something similar, where you start using a gifting approach to maybe gift some ownership to other generations in those types of structures as well. Thinking about those types of things, maybe you do pay a little bit more tax today, but you get something worth so much more on the back end. So curious kind of your thoughts about how CPAs can help you have those conversations with clients.
I love that because I would never have thought of that. So to talk about that today anyway.
Yeah.
So I have two thoughts. The first thought I have is to directly answer your question about the tax loss harvesting. It is something we do, but we throw a loophole into it. So let's just say we've got a client who's got, I don't know, $100,000 in gains in summer from realized gains. And then it's December, fourth quarter's been terrible. A perfect example is 2018, fourth quarter market goes down 20%. So you've got good gains from earlier that year, but you just got a bad fourth quarter. It's baby in bathwater. It's not that the investments are bad. It's just that it's been a bad quarter, right, for the market. What I would typically do is we would take, say, a portion of the assets to wash out part of the gains. Let's just say we can sell and get a $70,000 loss. So now all of a sudden they're only going to pay tax on 30 grand of profits. But I don't just go to cash. What I'll do is we use software to find out what ETF owns the highest holding of, say, if we sell Amazon at a loss, I go and type in Amazon and I find the highest holding within an ETF to get exposure. So we're not just sitting on our hands. So we still participate in any appreciation, because what tends to happen in the last quarter of the year, especially December, is small caps are usually it's small caps, but a lot of stocks that have been beaten up tend to get beaten up even further for tax loss harvesting purposes. And it's very simple supply and demand. If there's more buying enthusiasm than selling enthusiasm, price must rise. And if there's more selling enthusiasm than buying enthusiasm, price must fall. So if you get a lot of tax loss harvesting going on because of a bad fourth quarter, then what you're going to see is the price going down even further, which can create an opportunity where you miss an opportunity to buy low, right? That's where you pivot and you buy the ETF, let's just say, or if it's backwards, maybe you sell the ETF, but you buy the stock or a portfolio of maybe the top 5 stocks in that ETF to remain exposed to that sector or industry group. So that's the first thing. The other thing is,
which I think is a brilliant strategy, by the way. I love that because you're capitalizing on you're looking at the holistic picture, not just what makes the most sense to minimize our tax today. It's what makes the most sense to maintain exposure to this market, but maybe also take advantage of a structural thing that has gone on with how the portfolio is structured.
It's like you said earlier, it's like taking advantage of looking at the holistic big picture and saying, what's the best net after tax opportunity here, all things considered.
Yeah.
Not just implementing the strategy and sitting around and waiting for day 31, right?
Right.
But the other thing is, and this is a big pet peeve of mine, it's the inverse of what you've mentioned. It's the client that says, and I'll take two things that we just talked about and put them to one. My mom gave me this stock, 20 years ago, and because she gifted it to me, it's got a really low basis, and now I have to pay tax. I adopted her basis. So I don't want to sell it. I'm married to the stock, but it's a third of my net worth. And I'm sitting here going, Jesus, I don't, it's freaking me out because their financial plan is based on a rate, assumptions that we're making. And there's so much risk in that concentrated position. And this particular real life story, by the way, happened to be a small cap, like a regional bank. And And it's like sometimes I think CPAs might think, well, let's hold on to it, don't pay the tax. But as soon as you've lost 20% in market value, why not? You're going to wish you would have paid the tax, right? So I get it. It's almost like there's no way to win. And but the joke I always tell that if you have highly appreciated stock and you don't want to pay the tax, just hold on to the stock and the market will take care of your gains. You won't have to pay your tax. But in all seriousness, I think that there's a lot to be said for putting a plan together, a distribution plan to say, if this happens, Mr. and Mrs. Client, and we lose this much, then we need to have a distribution plan of reallocating this money and paying the tax. Otherwise, you're going to, and when the real life story in this situation was, the stock ended up falling like 60%. And I mean, appointment after appointment after appointment just could not get them to sell. And we lost way more than the taxes cost us,
Right.
So anyway.
Yeah, no, I've seen it too. I've seen the inverse of that too, where someone had a gifted basis that was significantly higher than the stock was ever going to hit because it had just plummeted. So built-in losses that, could not, they were like, well, we've got to get it back up to where it was. And my response is, you're never going to. It's never.
Famous last words, right?
Yeah. So, maybe it will, but not in your lifetime. That was a very significantly depreciated stock that we were able to convince them to use to take the inverse of like, do you think this stock is ever going to get back up? I think it was like the original basis was 100. It was trading at like $2 a share. It's like, will it ever be at that again? Probably not. Okay, let's find another way and another avenue to do this. So
the problem is money is such an emotional thing, and we all have to deal with those emotions, because not only do you have people that say, I want to wait till it gets back to even before I sell, but you got somebody else on the other side of the trade going, I don't want to buy until it gets down to this point, and then it just never gets there. Or I'm going to leave my money sitting in cash until the market goes down. And then the market goes down, like, well, I don't want to buy now. Things aren't going well. I want to wait for them to get better. So you want to wait for prices to get higher before you buy. Wait a minute. It's just a lot, very emotional, very emotional.
Well, I think that's the hardest part too, Hannah, about some of our CFO work that we do is we look at these things and it's like, look, these are just, I don't want to say they're just widgets. They're not just widgets. We're not that thing, but it's a lot easier for us to make unemotional decisions about people's businesses. We talk about, if the economy isn't going well for a certain sector of the economy, we'll have to have conversations with clients about, hey, I know we look at this and we see 10 employees. You look at this and see 10 people that you know really, really well. So we're not unaware of that challenge. What strategies do you do to kind of help bridge that emotional gap where for you, as much as you love your clients, it's still just numbers and facts and stuff like that. You're able to divorce yourself from the emotions. How do you help bridge that gap?
I think the first is just tons of education, like just always walking into a meeting with, this is what I do. And we tell our staff, it's when you walk into a meeting and somebody's worried, they're upset, they're confused, just always know they don't understand. Start with that. And then you have to teach them, right? Because they don't do what we do all day. We see it all day long. So it's almost like sometimes I think we forget that we're repeating this 4, 5, 6 times a day. They're hearing it once a year, maybe twice a year, right? So I think education is the first time. And I think the second would be lots of analogies, trying to draw analogies between something they do for a living, like their business, and make it kind of draw lines of comparison so that they would understand based on what they do for a living, what they're selling, their service they're selling, whatever. I think and the third, and this is probably the biggest one, and the one that works the best for me, is telling stories about when it didn't work. So you can, if you don't have real life stories, ChatGPT will make one up for you. It's like, I use ChatGPT like 10 times a day. I don't do it to make up stories. Unfortunately, I'm old enough to have plenty of my own, but it's if you tell stories, like, we have a new client who has, created in a very, very large basket of wealth at a very young age. 20 years of age is all.
Oh, wow.
And we're trying to tell him the story about the investments he's buying that he's done very well with, about another story about another client who had, 8 figures in cryptocurrencies and lost it all. So it's like analogies, stories, like don't be, learn from others' mistakes, So I think that's the best you can do. And then I think it's giving them, I often say in meetings, here's your financial answer. And by the way, here's the emotional answer. The biggest hottest topic when it comes to that doesn't matter if it's a business owner or not. It's, should I pay off my house or not? Always, should I pay off my house or should I just keep making payments? And the answer is, well, is it a great investment? Are you going to live there forever? Well, I mean, I'm not living there forever. I'm like, oh, why do you want to pay it off? Is it a great investment then? Is it like the best investment you own? Well, I don't know. Probably not, I guess. It's like, okay, what's your interest rate? 2.5. Why do you want to pay it off early? Makes me feel good, right? I don't want that bill anymore. Well, if your financial plan looks so phenomenal that it doesn't really matter whether we pay it off or not, if it makes you feel good to pay it off, it's not the right financial decision, but I'm okay with it. But if your financial plan says it's too tight, like we're riding these guardrails like way too tight, then we probably need to make the financially smart decision here for a while until those guardrails get wider, at which point maybe we can create some choices for ourselves. But
yeah, and here's a plan on how you can do that. Execute these 3 things. Let's talk again about this in 2 years once you've done these things and see where we sit. Have an annual check-in. I love that.
You mentioned owners, like employees,
or just
I like to,
or just like, if you're working with someone saying, hey, we're touching the guardrails too much, like, maybe there's a spending problem, right? Okay, like you guys are spending maybe a little too much on vacations. Let's cut back on the expensive vacations a little bit and check in 2 years and see where you sit.
Mm-hmm.
I love having some action items that you can take away from that conversation and say, I hear you. This is a goal. I'm telling you it's a little too tight. Here's what you can do to make it a little bit less tight. I think if you can do that, you're going to be so sticky with your clients.
Yeah. And then the owner's thing, you mentioned employees, like 10 staff. We see it as 10 employees. They see it as 10 people they know, know, like, trust, love, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you have to almost like look at it from you got to show them the numbers. And then you got to say, another thing is, you love these people. I get it. But if you were to start your company all over from scratch,
oh yeah,
and you were interviewing all new people, would those be the people you hired? And if the answer is maybe for any of them,
there's your answer.
That's the first people that probably need to go.
Mm-hmm.
But
well, I think this conversation has proved that we are far more alike than we came into this conversation likely thinking, because your answer to that question in terms of how you communicate this and take the emotion out of that and divorce yourself from it with your clients is the same way that we too like to communicate with our clients, especially delivering difficult financial information to them. So I love that we've bridged that gap for us and made that connection. So I think that's really cool. I feel like Joey, like, especially with your background, like y'all could take this podcast and run with it for a whole other podcast in and of itself. But we have come to the end of our time together. Adam, thank you so much for coming on the show and chatting with us about this. We like to wrap up our podcast with a totally out of left field, different type of question, change the tide of the conversation a little bit. And so I'm just going to throw this question out at you. And I was asked this question on a podcast I did recently, but I want to hear from you. What was your favorite concert you've ever attended? Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that is out of left field. So I'm a huge music fan. I actually have a music studio in my basement, so I used to produce music.
Okay.
So I like all. I'm gonna out somebody's gonna get upset on this episode for sure. I like all kinds of music except country. I just can't do it. I cannot do country. Can't do it.
My heart.
I'm sorry. No.
Sorry. This was just meant to be a Joey and Adam joint. Sorry, Hannah.
Apparently it was. You don't need BK friends by.
I mean, I don't know if I can pick one. I mean, it's like the first concert I ever saw was Aerosmith. And it was just, I've seen him 3 times. I loved Bruno Mars the first time. The second tour wasn't as good, but when he could play, he has so many hits now that it's hard to play all the great songs. So he can't play them all. I don't know. I'm a huge R&B and hip hop fan, but I would say I love Brian McKnight. So I've seen him several times, but God, best concerts ever. Because the thing about the performance too, I thought Dua Lipa was amazing. Man, I don't know. I'm all over the place. I've seen Revolution reggae concert. They were amazing. If you just want to chill out. But best was there a part 2 to that question? What was it? Was there a why?
That is the question.
I mean, I'd love to get into the why. I think that's important too. What it is about music that speaks to your soul.
It's probably the same thing that everybody, right? And it's an outlet. It's Ed Sheeran was great. Have you guys seen his special?
No.
His special is how he does his concerts. He literally is out there by himself with pedals. He starts with one rhythm, records a loop, Then he records another loop of him playing another part of the rhythm. Then he records a solo that loops it. The drums are him hitting his drum. And then he makes the whole song by himself, like as if he's in a coffee shop. It's incredible.
I still remember the first time I saw that YouTube video, my mind was blown when he did. I mean, this was back in like 2013 when he was first getting started. And I was like, oh, that dude's a musician. Like he just
does not mess around.
He does not mess around at all. See, Hannah, that was such a better question than I was going to ask, which I was going to ask Adam, which is what was his favorite Cleveland Browns quarterback over the last 25 years. But
yes.
Yours was a much better question. And Adam, you don't need to answer that. There's too many names.
Oh, well, I love it. If our listeners want to connect with you outside of this podcast, what is the best way for them to do that?
Just kind of general education. We also have a company called Elevate. The website is elevateandexit.com. We do all our business advisory stuff there. We're doing actually a 1031 DST podcast and webinar this Thursday. We're recording it, redistributing it with Greg Smith, who's 1031 IXP. So you're talking about an intermediary. So he's a great intermediary for 1031s. We have a podcast for Elevate. We do webinars for Elevate. We do podcasts for Libertas, and then I'm saying we're doing next month. We're doing a whole webinar and podcast on ESOPs. So kind of just dissecting.
One of my favorites.
I have lots of questions about that, so I will definitely be tuning in. Yeah,
most people don't understand them, so we're just trying to educate people. Like I said earlier, just bring awareness to owners so that they can continue being rock stars in their businesses, but don't forget to work on that business too. Don't forget to do that transition planning and make it a well-oiled machine so that you can have a life as well, not to manage building enterprise value and a legacy for yourself, your staff, and your family.
Awesome. Adam, thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
If you're a young CPA looking to develop in their careers, we're always looking for great people. Visit our website for remote work opportunities with Summit Virtual CFO, or find all our open positions at Anders CPAs and Advisors.